My son Marcus told me I was too old, too weak, and too much trouble, so he had me committed to a nursing facility without my permission and moved into my house like I was already 6 feet under. But I wasn't senile. I wasn't helpless. And I damn sure wasn't finished. While he thought I'd fade away quietly in some forgotten corner, I was planning something that would haunt him every single day for the rest of his life. This is how I made my own son learn that you should never bury someone who's still breathing. I raised Marcus with bleeding hands and a heart that never stopped giving. After his father died in that car accident, Marcus became my entire world. I worked double shifts at the diner until my feet swelled like balloons. I sold my mother's jewelry to pay for his college books. I ate crackers for dinner so he could have steak. And not once did I ask for gratitude because I thought love would return when I needed it most. When I collapsed in the grocery store that Thursday afternoon, I figured it was just exhaustion. I'd been working 16-hour days for 30 years. Marcus rushed to the hospital with his wife Jennifer, both of them wearing concerned faces like masks. "Mama, we've been talking," Marcus said, his voice soft like honey over poison. "You can't keep living alone. What if something worse happens next time?" They brought flowers to my hospital room and spoke in hushed tones about assisted living and peace of mind. I should have seen it coming, but when it's your own child, you want to believe their lies are actually love. What I didn't know was that behind my back, they'd already contacted social services. What I didn't know was that they'd been telling my neighbors I was having memory problems. What I didn't know was that Jennifer had already been going through my mail, my bank statements, my personal documents. 2 weeks later, they picked me up for what they called a family dinner. "Just the three of us," Marcus smiled. "We want to celebrate your recovery." I didn't pack anything because I thought I was coming home that same night. They drove me to a place that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Shady Oaks Retirement Community, the sign read. Marcus parked and turned to me with tears in his eyes that I now know were completely fake. "Just for a few weeks," he said, "until we can figure out a better arrangement. The staff is wonderful here. You'll love it." I looked at Jennifer, waiting for her to say this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she handed me a small bag with 3 days' worth of clothes and said, "We'll visit soon." That's when I knew. This wasn't temporary. This was permanent. They'd already made up their minds to erase me from my own life. The intake nurse had me sign papers I couldn't read without my glasses. Later, I found out one of those papers was a voluntary admission form with my signature that looked nothing like my handwriting. They'd practiced forging it. For 3 days, I sat in that sterile room with its beige walls and plastic flowers, watching other residents who'd also been abandoned by their families. Some talked to the air. Some forgot their own names. But I wasn't like them. My mind was sharp as ever, and it was cutting through their lies piece by piece. I asked to use the phone. The nurse said visiting hours only. I asked to speak with the director. She said Marcus had given specific instructions about my care. I asked to leave. She showed me a form that said I was there voluntarily for my own safety. That's when I realized they hadn't just betrayed me. They'd stolen my identity, my rights, my freedom. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated who they were dealing with. I spent that first week watching, listening, learning. I memorized staff schedules. I befriended the janitor who let me use his phone. I contacted my old lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years but who still remembered every detail of my affairs. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "this is Ruth Blackwood. I believe my son has committed fraud and I need your help to prove it." Within 48 hours, Sarah had uncovered something that made her blood run cold. Not only had Marcus forged documents, but he'd also been draining my accounts for months before I was even hospitalized. Sarah arrived at Shady Oaks like an avenging angel. She marched past the front desk, ignored the staff's protests, and found me in the activities room pretending to do a puzzle. "Ruth," she said, "you're not staying here another minute. And when we're done, your son is going to wish he'd never been born." We went over everything. The forged power of attorney I never signed. The fake medical evaluations claiming I was mentally incompetent. The bank transfers moving my money into accounts I couldn't access. The deed to my house that somehow now had Marcus's name on it alongside mine. But the worst part? They'd been planning this for over a year. Jennifer had been photographing my medicine bottles, documenting every time I forgot a name or misplaced my keys, building a case to prove I was losing my mind. Sarah pulled out her phone and started recording. "Ruth," she said, "I want you to tell me today's date, the president's name, and your social security number." I answered every question perfectly. Then she asked me to solve a math problem, recite my address, and explain the plot of the last book I'd read. Again, perfect answers. "This woman," Sarah announced to the staff member who'd been listening, "is sharper than most people half her age. Whoever said she was mentally incompetent was either lying or criminally negligent." That night, Sarah made a phone call that would change everything. By morning, we'd have the evidence we needed to not just free me, but to destroy Marcus financially and legally. Sarah worked through the night with a private investigator named Tom Walsh. By dawn, they'd uncovered a trail of fraud that went deeper than we'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just forged my signature. He'd been stealing from me for 2 years. Every month, he'd transferred money from my savings account to pay his mortgage, his credit cards, his wife's shopping sprees. They'd used my good credit to take out loans I never authorized. They'd even sold my car and pocketed the money. But here's the beautiful part. Marcus was sloppy. He left digital fingerprints everywhere. Sarah had bank records, forged documents, recorded phone calls where Marcus discussed my fake mental decline with people who were willing to testify. Within a week, Sarah filed criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and unlawful imprisonment. She also filed a civil lawsuit demanding the return of all my assets, plus damages for emotional distress. The morning the police served Marcus with the papers, I was sitting in Sarah's office, legally free and madder than I'd ever been in my life. Sarah smiled at me and said, "Ruth, how would you like to buy the house next door to your old place? I hear it's about to go on the market." What Marcus didn't know was that his financial crimes had been reported to his employer. What he didn't know was that his mortgage company had been notified about the fraudulent payments. What he didn't know was that I was about to become his worst nightmare. The house next door to my old place was perfect. Single story, big front porch, and windows that looked directly into Marcus's kitchen. I paid cash, no questions asked, using the money Sarah had recovered from his accounts. Moving day was a Saturday. I hired the loudest moving truck I could find and made sure they arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. I wanted Marcus to see every box, every piece of furniture, every sign that his mother was back and closer than ever. I watched from my new living room window as Marcus stepped outside in his pajamas, coffee mug in hand, probably checking to see what all the noise was about. When he saw me directing the movers, his face went white as hospital sheets. He dropped the mug. Coffee splattered everywhere. He stood there for a full minute, mouth open like a fish gasping for air, before turning around and slamming his door so hard I heard it from across the yard. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Every morning I sat on my front porch with my coffee and newspaper, wearing my brightest smile and my Sunday best. I planted roses along our shared fence, the kind that bloom big and red and impossible to ignore. I installed motion sensor lights that lit up my yard like a stadium every time Marcus tried to sneak out to his car. Jennifer started closing all their curtains during the day. Marcus began parking in their backyard instead of the driveway. They stopped having their weekly barbecues, stopped inviting friends over, stopped living their lives the way they had when they thought I was locked away forever. But the real torture wasn't what I did. It was what I represented. Every time Marcus looked out his window, he saw the woman he'd tried to erase. Every morning, he was reminded that his victim had not only survived, but thrived. Every day, he had to face the living proof of his failure. Their marriage started cracking under the pressure. I could hear them arguing through the thin walls. Jennifer's voice, shrill and accusatory. "She's doing this on purpose." Marcus's voice, defensive and weak. "What did you expect would happen?" 3 months after I moved in, something happened that even I didn't see coming. Marcus's teenage son, Kevin, my grandson who'd been kept away from me during the whole ordeal, showed up at my door. Kevin was 17, tall like his grandfather, but with Marcus's eyes and my stubborn chin. He knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon, school backpack slung over his shoulder, looking like he'd been wrestling with a decision for weeks. "Grandma Ruth," he said when I opened the door. "Can we talk?" I let him in, made him a sandwich, and listened while he told me everything. How Marcus and Jennifer had told him I was sick and dangerous. How they'd said I was in a special hospital getting treatment. How they'd forbidden him from asking questions or trying to contact me. But then Kevin had overheard a phone call between Marcus and his lawyer. He'd heard the words fraud and criminal charges and nursing home. He'd started researching online, found news articles about the case, discovered the truth his parents had hidden from him. "Grandma," he said, his voice breaking, "I had no idea what they did to you. I thought you didn't want to see me anymore." That's when I realized Marcus hadn't just stolen my money and my freedom. He'd stolen my relationship with my grandson, poisoned a child against his own grandmother with lies and manipulation. Kevin started visiting me every day after school. I helped him with homework, taught him to cook my famous pot roast, told him stories about his grandfather that Marcus had never bothered to share. For the first time in months, I felt like a grandmother again, instead of just a victim seeking revenge. The criminal trial was set for January. Marcus had hired an expensive lawyer with money he didn't have, probably borrowing against assets that were already in question. Jennifer had moved back in with her mother, taking their younger daughter but leaving Kevin behind. But I didn't want to wait for a trial to finish what I'd started. On Christmas Eve, I did something that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. I hosted a family dinner and invited Kevin, my sister Margaret, who'd driven down from Portland, and my old neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd been worried sick about me during my disappearance. We cooked all day. The smell of turkey and apple pie drifted across the yard and through Marcus's windows. I strung Christmas lights around my porch, played carols loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, and created the warm, loving family gathering that Marcus had destroyed when he threw me away. Through the window, I could see him sitting alone in his dark kitchen, eating a frozen dinner and staring at the wall. No wife, no family dinner, no Christmas joy. Just him and the consequences of his choices. Kevin looked over at his father's house and said, "Should I invite him over?" I thought about it for a long moment, then shook my head. "Honey," I said, "forgiveness is earned, not given. And some people need to sit with their choices for a while before they're ready to change." The trial ended with Marcus pleading guilty to avoid prison time. He was sentenced to probation, community service, and full restitution of the money he'd stolen. His reputation was destroyed, his marriage was over, and his relationship with his children was hanging by a thread. But here's what I learned through all of this. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, your right to exist on your own terms. I got my money back, my freedom back, my family back. Marcus got a lesson he'll never forget about the cost of treating people like they're disposable. Today, Kevin lives with me full-time. He's thriving in school, planning for college, and learning what real family loyalty looks like. Marcus has moved into a small apartment across town, working 2 jobs to pay his legal fees and trying to rebuild his life from scratch. Sometimes I see him at the grocery store or the bank. He looks older, sadder, like a man who finally understands what he lost when he threw away the person who loved him most. Do I regret what I did? Not for a second. Because sometimes the only way to teach someone about love is to show them life without it. And sometimes the only way to prove you're not dead is to come back stronger than ever and remind everyone why they should have treated you better when they had the chance. My name is Ruth Blackwood, and this is the story of how I refused to disappear quietly into the night, because when someone tries to bury you, they better make sure you're actually dead first.
If stories like this one hit you right in the heart, you're definitely in the right place. I share real stories from grandmothers who refuse to be silenced, who fought back when their own families tried to erase them, and who proved that wisdom and experience are the most dangerous weapons of all. Hit that subscribe button right now because, trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. I've got stories about grandmothers who outsmarted scammers, exposed cheating spouses, and even took down corrupt nursing homes. These women didn't just survive, they thrived. And if Ruth's revenge gave you chills, smash that like button to let me know. Your support helps me bring you more incredible stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed too far. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Ruth's situation? Would you have moved next door, or would you have chosen a different kind of revenge?